Story 1. The Ice Road Trucker Who Disappeared into White. Marcus LeBlanc had been driving ice roads in Canada's Northwest Territories for 9 winters when he took the route across Great Slave Lake in February 2018. The ice road season was his livelihood. Those few months when frozen lakes became highways connecting remote diamond mines and isolated communities to the outside world. Marcus knew the dangers: thin ice, whiteout conditions, vehicles breaking through and sinking into black water. But he also knew the protocols, the safety measures, the signs of trouble. 9 winters had taught him to read ice like other people read books. The load was standard: mining equipment heading to a site near Yellowknife, 43,000 pounds of cargo that his reinforced truck could handle easily on solid ice. Marcus had checked the ice road conditions that morning. Thickness reported at 42 inches, well above the minimum safe depth. Temperature had been stable at -30 Celsius for weeks. Perfect conditions. He departed the staging area at Detta around 10 a.m., the sun barely cresting the horizon in the Arctic winter. The ice road stretched ahead, marked by reflective posts every 100 meters, a white corridor across the frozen lake. Other trucks had passed through that morning, leaving fresh tracks in the compacted snow. Everything looked normal. Marcus kept his speed steady at 25 kilometers per hour, the recommended pace for heavy loads. His CB radio crackled with occasional transmissions from other drivers, position updates, weather observations, casual conversation that helped break the isolation. The ice beneath his wheels felt solid, the truck tracking straight and stable. Around 11:30 a.m., 30 kilometers onto the lake, Marcus noticed the weather changing. Not dramatically, but a thickening of the air, a reduction in visibility. The horizon began to blur, sky and ice merging into undifferentiated white. He'd driven through whiteouts before; they were common on the ice roads. So he slowed to 15 kilometers per hour and focused on the reflective marker posts. But something was wrong with the markers. They were spaced irregularly now, appearing at unpredictable intervals. Marcus would see one post, then drive what felt like the normal 100 meters, but no next post would appear. Then suddenly 3 posts would cluster together. The spacing made no sense. "Detta Base, this is Ice Runner 7, Marcus called on his CB. "I'm 30 kilometers out, experiencing visibility issues and marker irregularities. Can you confirm my position? Over." Static answered. Marcus adjusted the frequency, tried again. More static. The radio had worked fine 20 minutes ago, but now every channel produced only white noise. He checked his GPS. The screen showed his position, but the map display was blank white. No roads, no landmarks, no terrain features. Just a blue dot representing his truck floating in, digital whiteness. Marcus slowed further, nearly stopping. He couldn't navigate without markers or GPS details. The protocol in these situations was clear: stop, wait for visibility to improve, maintain radio contact with base. But he couldn't maintain radio contact, and stopping meant sitting stationary in -30 temperature. His truck would stay warm for hours, but eventually fuel would run low. He decided to continue moving slowly, watching for marker posts, trusting that the ice road continued straight ahead. But within minutes, Marcus realized the ice beneath him felt different. Not thinner, he wasn't breaking through, but textured differently, as if he'd left the maintained ice road and was driving across untouched lake surface. Marcus stopped the truck and climbed down to inspect. The moment his boots hit the ice, he understood something was profoundly wrong. The surface beneath him wasn't the compacted snow of the ice road. It was clear ice, smooth and transparent, showing black water underneath. And when he looked back toward his truck, he couldn't see his tire tracks. The ice showed no marks, no indication his truck had just driven across it. He turned in a slow circle, looking for the marker posts, for any sign of the ice road. Nothing. just flat white ice extending in all directions, blending seamlessly into white sky. No horizon line, no shadows, no depth perception. He'd entered a whiteout so complete that up and down became meaningless concepts. Marcus climbed back in his truck, fighting rising panic. He grabbed his emergency satellite phone, every ice road driver carried one, and activated it. The device powered on, showed full signal strength, but when he tried to dial base, the call wouldn't connect. The phone simply displayed calling indefinitely, never completing the connection. He checked his mirrors, confirming his trailer was still attached, his cargo still secure. Everything about his truck was normal. Only the world outside had changed, becoming this featureless white void. Marcus made a decision. He'd drive in a straight line, maintaining his compass heading east. Eventually, he'd reach the far shore of Great Slave Lake, or he'd intersect the ice road again, or he'd find some landmark. Sitting still wasn't an option. Movement, even uncertain movement, felt better than stasis. He put the truck in gear and began driving, watching his compass obsessively to maintain direction. His speedometer showed 15 kilometers per hour. His odometer ticked upward, recording distance. But the view outside never changed. Just white ice, white sky, white air, all merging into a single, undifferentiated field. After what his clock said was 30 minutes, Marcus should have covered 7 or 8 kilometers. At that distance, even in whiteout conditions, he should have reached either shore or crossed back over the ice road. Great Slave Lake was 40 kilometers wide at this point. He'd already been 30 kilometers out when the whiteout started, meaning he had at most 10 kilometers before reaching land. But the whiteness continued. Marcus drove for another 30 minutes, then an hour. His odometer showed he'd traveled 25 kilometers since the whiteout started, which should have carried him completely across the lake and onto land. Yet he remained surrounded by featureless ice. Marcus stopped the truck again, checking all his instruments. Fuel, 3/4 tank. Engine, normal temperature. Compass, still pointing east. Clock, 1:47 p.m. He'd been in the whiteout for over 2 hours. His GPS still showed the blue dot, still floating in blank white space. He climbed out of the truck again, this time walking away from it to see if distance provided any perspective. 20 paces away, he turned back. His truck sat there, solid and real, its red paint vivid against the white background. But it cast no shadow despite the sun being up somewhere. And when Marcus looked at the ice beneath his feet, he saw his reflection. Not a vague dark shape, but a perfect mirror image, as if he were standing on glass above an infinite white void. Marcus walked back to his truck and climbed inside, his hands shaking from more than cold. This wasn't normal whiteout. This was something else, some phenomenon that had pulled him out of normal geography into a space that existed only as white. No landmarks, no terrain, no physical reality except the ice beneath his wheels and the truck surrounding him. His CB radio suddenly crackled to life. Ice Runner 7, this is Data Base. Do you copy? Over. Relief flooded through Marcus. Data Base, Ice Runner 7 copies. I'm in severe whiteout conditions, position unknown, request guidance, over. Ice Runner 7, confirm your last known position. Approximately 30 kilometers onto Great Slave Lake, heading east from Deta. Entered whiteout around 11:30 hours. Have been driving east since then, but can't locate shore. Odometer shows I've traveled over 40 kilometers, but still on ice. Something's wrong with my position. A long pause. Then, Ice Runner 7, your transmission is breaking up. Cannot confirm position. Please repeat. Marcus repeated his information, speaking slowly and clearly. But the response was identical. Cannot confirm position. Please repeat. As if the base could hear him but couldn't understand him or couldn't accept what he was saying. Data base, can you triangulate my position from my radio signal? Over. Negative, Ice Runner 7. We're not receiving a locatable signal from you. Your transmission appears to be coming from everywhere. Cannot triangulate. Marcus felt his stomach drop. His signal was coming from everywhere. He wasn't in a specific location anymore. He'd somehow left the geography that allowed for position and location. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice was different. Not the dispatcher at Data Base, but another trucker's voice, rough and tired. Ice Runner 7. This is Ice Runner 12. I can hear you. I'm in the white too. Have been for 3 days. Marcus grabbed the mic. Ice Runner 12, where are you? How long have you been here? Don't know where. Just white. I entered a whiteout on February 6th. Been driving ever since. Fuel gauge doesn't go down. Odometer keeps climbing, but the white never ends. February 6th. That was 4 days ago. Marcus checked his calendar. Today was February 10th. Ice Runner 12, have you tried stopping? Tried walking away from your truck? Tried everything. Nothing changes, the white just is. I think we drove into some kind of gap, a place between places. The ice roads cross these big lakes, right? Big empty spaces. Maybe in winter when everything's frozen and white, sometimes the emptiness becomes too empty. Becomes a void, and we fell into it. The theory was insane, but Marcus had no better explanation. The ice road had been there, solid and real, and then it wasn't. Replaced by infinite white that allowed forward movement but led nowhere. Is there a way out? Marcus asked. I don't know. I'm still looking, but I've met others. Heard them on the CB. There's at least 6 of us in here. All ice road truckers, all entered whiteouts, all trapped in the white. We drive and drive and drive, but there's no destination. Just distance without arrival. Over the next hours, Marcus made contact with 5 other truckers, all experiencing the same phenomenon. Some had been in the white for days. One claimed to have been driving for 2 weeks. All described identical conditions: infinite white ice, functionless GPS, mirrors that showed no tracks, and the persistent sense of being nowhere. They formed a convoy of sorts, communicating via CB, trying to coordinate their movements. Maybe if they all drove in formation, all headed the same direction, they'd accumulate enough combined mass or intention to break through. But coordinating was impossible. None of them could see each other, even when their radios suggested they were meters apart. Marcus drove through the afternoon, though the light never changed. The sun never set. Or perhaps it had set and the whiteness carried its own illumination. Time became as meaningless as position. Around what his clock insisted was 9 p.m., Marcus noticed something in the whiteness ahead. A darkness, not a structure but an absence, a place where the white ended. He drove toward it, accelerating slightly, desperate for any change. The darkness resolved into a storm, not a whiteout but a genuine blizzard, wind, driving snow, reduced visibility but visibility nonetheless. Marcus could see the snow moving, could feel his truck buffeted by wind. It was real weather, natural weather, connected to the physical world. He drove into the storm, and the white shattered around him like glass. Suddenly he could see terrain, shore ahead, trees, rocks, the solid earth beyond the lake. His GPS flickered back to life, showing him 2 kilometers from the eastern shore of Great Slave Lake. His position made sense again. Marcus drove those final 2 kilometers and rolled off the ice road onto land, pulling over at the first safe spot. He sat in his truck, shaking, staring at his instruments. His clock showed 9:24 p.m. He'd been on the ice for 11 hours, but should have crossed in 2 at most. His odometer showed he'd traveled 187 kilometers, impossible distance for a 40-kilometer lake crossing. He grabbed his satellite phone and called Data Base. This time, the connection went through immediately. Data Base, this is Marcus LeBlanc, Ice Runner 7. I just completed crossing. Experienced severe weather conditions and position anomalies. Requesting someone confirm I'm really on the eastern shore. Ice Runner 7 database copies. GPS shows you on the eastern shore, 2 kilometers past Ice Road terminus. You're showing as having crossed successfully. Are you injured? Do you need assistance? I'm fine, but I lost contact for hours. Did you track my position during crossing? Negative. Ice Runner 7. We lost your signal approximately 30 kilometers onto the lake around 11:45 hours. Signal returned at 21:17 hours, showing you 2 kilometers from eastern shore. We logged it as equipment malfunction during whiteout conditions. Happens sometimes with the GPS trackers. Marcus wanted to explain about the white, about the other truckers, about driving 187 kilometers across a 40-kilometer lake. But he knew how it would sound. Copy that. Ice Runner 7 continuing to destination. He delivered his load to the mine site, filed his paperwork, said nothing about the experience. But he checked with other drivers, asked carefully about unusual whiteout experiences. Most had stories, brief disorientation, instruments acting strangely, feeling lost even on familiar routes. But nothing like Marcus's 11 hours in infinite white, except one driver, an older man named Robert, who listened to Marcus's vague questions and pulled him aside. You went into the white, the real white, the place under the ice where lost things go. You know about it? Heard stories. Some ice road drivers don't come back, not because they break through the ice. We'd find the trucks if that happened. They just vanish. Completely gone, no trace. The assumption is they went through somewhere the ice was thinner than reported. But maybe some of them went into the white instead. I heard other truckers in there on the CB, Marcus said. People who've been trapped for days or weeks. Robert nodded slowly. The white is patient. It holds what it catches. You got lucky, found the edge, found the storm that marked the boundary. Most don't. Most just drive forever. Fuel never running out because there's nowhere to go and no time to measure. They're still in there, still driving, still calling on the CB to whoever might hear. Marcus never drove ice roads again. That winter was his last. He took work on regular highways, on routes where the ground stayed solid year-round, where whiteouts were just weather instead of doorways into infinite white voids beneath the ice. But sometimes on winter nights, Marcus would tune a CB radio to the ice road frequencies and listen. And sometimes he'd hear them, the truckers in the white calling positions that didn't exist, asking for guidance no one could give, driving forever through spaces between spaces, trapped in the emptiness that winter creates when snow and ice make everything the same absent color. Story 2. The cabin that repeated the same week. Jennifer Holbrook rented the cottage on Lake Superior in August 2019 specifically for its isolation. She was a writer from Toronto who needed total silence to finish her novel, and the listing promised exactly that. Remote cabin, no neighbors for 5 kilometers, no internet, minimal cell service. 1 week of pure solitude on the north shore of the world's largest freshwater lake. Perfect. The drive from Thunder Bay took 3 hours on progressively smaller roads, the final stretch a rutted dirt track that Jennifer's sedan barely managed. The cabin appeared exactly as the photos showed. Small single-room structure, wood-burning stove, propane refrigerator, solar panels providing minimal electricity. The lake stretched vast and gray beyond a rocky beach, no other buildings visible in any direction. The owner had left a welcome note on the table. Enjoy your stay. Checkout is Saturday at 11 a.m. Please leave the cabin as you found it. Simple enough. Jennifer unpacked her groceries, set up her laptop, and settled into the quiet routine she'd planned. The first 3 days proceeded perfectly. Jennifer wrote during the mornings, hiked the shoreline in the afternoons, read by oil lamp in the evenings. The isolation was exactly what she'd needed. Her novel, which had stalled for months, began flowing again. By Wednesday evening, she'd written over 15,000 words. Thursday morning, Jennifer woke to find something odd. Her word count had reset. The novel document showed the same length it had been on Monday. The 15,000 words she'd added were gone. But her handwritten notes remained, describing scenes she'd written, quoting dialogue she remembered typing. The document had somehow reverted to its Monday version. Jennifer checked her laptop's file history. The document showed as last modified on Monday at 6:47 p.m. But Jennifer distinctly remembered working on it Tuesday, Wednesday, today being Thursday. She must have somehow saved to the wrong file or her laptop had glitched. She spent Thursday rewriting what she could remember, frustrated but assuming a simple technical error. Friday morning, Jennifer woke to find the word count reset again, back to Monday's length. And when she checked her groceries, she found them at Monday levels too. Bread that should have been half eaten was whole. Milk that should have been nearly empty was full. The propane tank, which she'd used for 3 days of cooking, read completely full. That's when Jennifer noticed the note on the table. Enjoy your stay. Checkout is Saturday at 11 a.m. The same welcome note, in the same position as if she'd just arrived. She grabbed her phone. August 19th. Monday. The date showed Monday, August 19th, the same day she'd arrived. But Jennifer had clear memories of 4 days at the cabin. She remembered the hikes she'd taken, the meals she'd cooked, the writing she'd done. Jennifer walked outside to her car. The odometer showed exactly what it had when she'd arrived. No additional kilometers from the long walk she'd taken up the dirt road on Wednesday. Her car's gas tank, completely full, though she'd run it down to 3/4 tank during the drive from Thunder Bay. Everything had reset to Monday, but Jennifer's memories hadn't. She remembered Tuesday through Thursday, remembered writing 15,000 words twice, remembered 4 days of experiences that apparently hadn't happened. She drove back up the dirt road toward the main highway, thinking she'd leave, get away from whatever was happening. But after 30 minutes of driving, she found herself pulling up to the cabin again. The road had looped back on itself, or she'd gotten turned around, or the geography had rearranged. She tried again, watching the road carefully, noting landmarks. Same result. Every path away from the cabin eventually curved back to it. Jennifer spent Monday, or what presented as Monday again, testing the boundaries of the cabin's area. She could walk about a kilometer in any direction before the landscape would subtly redirect her. Trees would thicken, forcing her to detour. Rocky terrain would become impassable. The lakeshore would curve back on itself. All paths led back to the cabin. She was trapped, not by walls or barriers, but by geography that refused to let her leave. Tuesday arrived, or seemed to. Jennifer experienced a full day, wrote, ate, explored, but Wednesday morning she woke to Monday again. Same date on her phone, same full propane tank, same welcome note. Her memories of Tuesday existed, but Tuesday itself had been erased. The cabin was repeating Monday over and over, and only Jennifer retained memories of the repetitions. She tried everything, left obvious markers, arrangements of rocks, carved messages on trees, items placed conspicuously. They all disappeared, each reset, everything returning to Monday's configuration. She tried staying awake through midnight, thinking maybe the reset happened at day's end. But at 12:01 a.m. Tuesday, Jennifer would blink and find herself waking in the cabin bed at 7:30 a.m. Monday. Memories of the previous day intact, but the day itself erased. After experiencing Monday 20 times, Jennifer began finding details she'd missed. A calendar on the wall showed August 2019. But the dates were wrong, shifted by several days compared to her phone. The welcome note's handwriting looked strange. The letters formed in ways that were almost but not quite normal. And the propane tank had no manufacturer's label, no serial number, no indication of origin. The cabin existed, but not quite correctly, like a copy made by something that understood cabins conceptually, but didn't quite grasp the details. Jennifer tried writing messages to whoever might come after her, warnings, explanations. But the messages disappeared with each reset. She tried deliberately damaging the cabin, thinking destruction might break the loop. But she couldn't. Axes wouldn't bite into walls. Fire wouldn't catch on the wooden structure. The cabin was inviolable. On the 31st repetition of Monday, Jennifer heard something she hadn't noticed before. Voices outside. She looked through the window and saw figures on the beach. People, a family with children setting up for a picnic. Jennifer ran outside, shouting, waving, but the family didn't respond. They went about their picnic preparations, talking and laughing, completely oblivious to Jennifer's presence. She ran up to them, tried to speak directly, even tried to grab their arms. Her hands passed through them like smoke. They were ghosts. Or she was. One or the other wasn't fully real. The family stayed for hours and Jennifer watched them carefully. They kept checking their watches, commenting on the time. Almost 3 p.m. Need to leave by 4:30. Want to be back before dark. Linear time applied to them even though it didn't apply to Jennifer. At 4:15 p.m. exactly, the family packed up and left. Jennifer tried to follow them, but as always, the path curved back to the cabin. And the next morning, Monday morning again, the family was gone. All evidence of them erased. But Jennifer had learned something. Other people could enter this space briefly. They weren't trapped like she was, but they passed through, experienced different times, existed in parallel to Jennifer's endless Monday. She began watching for other visitors. Every 3 or 4 Mondays, someone would appear. Hikers passing through, kayakers stopping at the beach, once a surveyor taking measurements. All of them oblivious to Jennifer, all of them experiencing a different time than she was. On the 47th Monday, Jennifer saw someone who saw her back. A woman in old-fashioned clothing, early 20th century style, standing near the tree line. The woman looked directly at Jennifer and mouthed words. "You're trapped too." Jennifer ran toward her, but the woman faded before she arrived, becoming translucent and then disappearing. But her presence proved Jennifer wasn't alone. Someone else had been trapped here, or was trapped in a different layer of time in the same space. That night, Monday night for the 47th time, Jennifer heard knocking on the cabin door. She opened it to find the woman from the tree line, more solid now in the darkness. "I'm Catherine," the woman said. "I rented this cabin in 1923. I've been here ever since, trapped in July 21st. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know anymore. The same Monday, maybe 50 times, almost 2 months worth of Mondays." "The cabin traps time," Catherine explained, "or it exists in trap time. This location, this structure, something about it makes temporal loops. I've met 4 others over the years. They appear, stay trapped for a while in their own loops, then eventually disappear. I don't know if they escape or fade or die. But I've been here the longest, 96 years of July 21st. Jennifer felt horror at the number, 96 years of the same day. "How are you still sane?" "I'm not really. I exist between lucid periods and periods of absence. Time breaks people the way water breaks rocks." Slowly but completely, Catherine looked at Jennifer with ancient eyes. "You'll fade too eventually. The loop gets weaker each repetition. You'll notice you're less solid, less real. Eventually you become like me, a ghost in your own trapped day, only occasionally substantial enough to interact with the rare others who get trapped." "There has to be a way out," Jennifer said. "There was. Once. The first few days I could have left, but I didn't realize I was trapped until it was too late. The loop strengthened around me. After a certain point, escape becomes impossible. You're woven too deeply into the repeated time." Jennifer spent the next Mondays with Catherine when she appeared. Not every day, but every 5 or 6 Mondays, the loops synchronizing enough for them to interact. Catherine taught her the boundaries of the cabin's temporal prison, showed her the thin places where other times bled through. On the 73rd Monday, Jennifer noticed herself in a mirror and saw what Catherine had warned about. She was fading. Her reflection was less solid, slightly translucent. The loop was consuming her, transforming her from a person trapped in time to a person made of time. She made a final, desperate attempt. On the 88th Monday, when a group of hikers passed through, Jennifer tried with all her will to become visible to them. She screamed, she grabbed at them, she threw rocks through their bodies. And for just a moment, one of them paused. "Did you hear something?" the hiker asked his companions. "Just wind," another replied. But he'd heard something. Jennifer's existence had touched normal reality briefly. She followed them as they hiked, away, forcing herself to remain focused on them rather than the cabin. The landscape tried to redirect her as always, but she pushed through, maintaining her awareness of the hikers. She walked for what felt like hours, every step requiring immense concentration. The cabin pulled at her, the loop trying to reassert itself, but Jennifer kept moving, kept following the hikers. And then, abruptly, she was on a normal hiking trail. The hikers ahead looked solid, completely real. Jennifer looked back and couldn't see the cabin anymore. Just forest, ordinary and real. She'd escaped. By walking beyond the loop's ability to hold her, by focusing on linear time instead of her trapped Monday, Jennifer had broken free. She stumbled onto the highway 2 days later, disoriented and exhausted. Her phone showed August 20. Only 3 days had passed in the outside world, though Jennifer had experienced 90 Mondays. She'd aged 3 days while living through over 3 months. Jennifer drove back to Toronto and tried to report her experience. But she had no proof. No rental records existed for a cabin at that location. The property owner she'd paid through an online platform didn't exist. The listing had vanished from the rental site. As far as any official record showed, Jennifer had simply disappeared for 3 days. But Jennifer remembered every Monday. And she remembered Catherine, still trapped in July 21st, 1923, a ghost made of repeated time, waiting in a cabin that existed in the gaps where days got stuck and replayed forever. Jennifer tried to find the cabin again with a search party, tried to save Catherine or any others trapped there. But the road wasn't where she remembered. The shoreline had different features. The cabin existed only for those who rented it, who entered its temporal loop unaware. Somewhere on the north shore of Lake Superior, that cabin still stands, and Catherine still experiences July 21st, and anyone who rents it might find themselves trapped in endless repetition, the same day rewinding again and again until they fade into ghosts made of stuck time, waiting for the rare others who get caught in the same loop. Story 3. The flight that landed 5 years early. Captain Rebecca Thorpe had been flying commercial routes for Air Canada for 14 years when she piloted Flight 437 from Vancouver to Toronto on October 12, 2024. It was a standard domestic flight, a route Rebecca had flown hundreds of times. 3.5 hours of routine aviation over the Canadian Rockies and Prairies. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, well-maintained and familiar. Weather conditions were optimal. Everything about the flight screamed normal. Boarding proceeded routinely. Rebecca and her first officer completed the pre-flight checklist, confirmed the passenger count at 167, and received clearance from Vancouver Tower. Flight 437 pushed back from the gate at 1:15 p.m. Pacific Time, taxied to runway, and took off, smoothly at 1:33 p.m. The initial climb was textbook. Rebecca leveled off at cruising altitude of 38,000 feet at 1:47 p.m., engaged autopilot, and settled into the monitoring routine that constituted most of modern commercial aviation. Her first officer, Michael Reyes, handled radio communications with air traffic control. Everything proceeded exactly as it had on thousands of previous flights. Around 2:20 p.m., crossing over the Rockies, Rebecca noticed something odd. The clouds below them looked wrong, not the formation or pattern, but the color. They had a faint golden tinge as if lit by sunset, despite it being mid-afternoon. She mentioned it to Michael, who agreed they looked unusual but wasn't concerned. Probably just particular ice crystals or atmospheric conditions. At 2:45 p.m., Rebecca tried to check their position with Calgary Center Air Traffic Control. Calgary Center, Air Canada 437, requesting position confirmation. No response. She tried again. Still no response. Michael tried on backup radio. Nothing but static. "We've lost contact with ATC," Michael said, checking the radio systems. "Equipment shows functional, but we're not receiving anything." Rebecca checked the GPS navigation. It showed their position as impossible. According to the GPS, they were exactly where they should be geographically, but the date displayed was October 12, 2019. 5 years in the past. "That's a software glitch," Rebecca said. "The GPS date got corrupted somehow. Don't worry about it." But when Michael checked his personal phone, it showed the same date, October 12, 2019. So did Rebecca's phone. So did the aircraft's time system. Every clock, every calendar, every digital system on the plane insisted it was 2019. "We're experiencing some kind of electromagnetic anomaly," Rebecca decided, "something affecting all our timekeeping systems. We'll continue on course and re-establish contact with ATC when we're past whatever's causing this." The flight continued eastward. But as minutes passed, Rebecca noticed more anomalies. The terrain below, when visible through cloud breaks, looked subtly different. Cities that should have shown certain development patterns looked less developed. Calgary, when they passed over it, had a skyline missing several buildings Rebecca knew had been completed by 2024. "Michael, look at Calgary. Does that look right to you?" Michael studied the city below. "It looks older, or less built up. But I'm not that familiar with Calgary from the air." Rebecca was. She'd flown over Calgary hundreds of times and knew its skyline well. What she saw below was Calgary's skyline from approximately 2019, before the recent high-rise construction boom, before the new developments. At 3:15 p.m., Rebecca made a decision. "I'm going to make a general emergency call. Something genuinely strange is happening." She switched to the emergency frequency. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Air Canada Flight 437, Boeing 737, experiencing equipment anomalies and unable to contact ATC. Any station, please respond." A voice crackled back immediately. "Aircraft calling Mayday, this is Winnipeg Center. Confirm your identity. We have no flight plan for Air Canada 437. Rebecca felt ice in her stomach. "Winnipeg Center, Air Canada 437, flight from Vancouver to Toronto departed 1:33 p.m. Pacific Time. We're experiencing complete radio failure except this frequency. Air Canada 437, negative. We show no such flight in our system. What is your aircraft type and registration?" Rebecca provided the information. A long pause followed. Then, "Air Canada 437, the registration you provided shows that aircraft is currently on the ground in maintenance in Vancouver. It's not airborne. What is your actual registration?" "That is our actual registration," Rebecca insisted. "I'm the pilot. I'm currently flying this aircraft at 38,000 feet over Manitoba. This isn't a joke." Another pause. "Air Canada 437, stand by." Rebecca and Michael exchanged looks. The aircraft wasn't supposed to be in maintenance. It had been in perfect condition when they departed. They were flying it right now. "Air Canada 437, what date do you show?" "October 12, 2019, but that's erroneous. Our actual date is October 12th, 2024. We're experiencing systemic electronic problems. An even longer pause. Then a different voice, more authoritative. Air Canada 437, this is Winnipeg Center Supervisor. Today's date is October 12th, 2019. If you're genuinely airborne, you're flying on a date 5 years before you claim. We need you to squawk ident and begin descent to Thunder Bay for emergency landing. Rebecca's mind raced. Either everyone on the ground was wrong about the date, or the aircraft and everyone on it had somehow traveled 5 years backward in time. Neither possibility made sense, but she had to prioritize safety. She had 167 passengers who needed to land safely regardless of what year it was. Winnipeg Center, Air Canada 437 complying. Beginning descent to Thunder Bay. Rebecca disengaged autopilot and started a gradual descent. She activated the intercom to the cabin. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for early landing. Passengers, this is Captain Thorpe. We're experiencing technical difficulties and we'll be making an early landing in Thunder Bay. This is purely precautionary. Please follow crew instructions. As they descended, Rebecca looked out at the landscape below. Everything looked consistent with 2019. City sizes, highway development patterns, even the types of vehicles visible on roads. Either the entire visible world had been transformed to match 2019, or the aircraft had genuinely traveled through time. Landing clearance came from Thunder Bay Tower, where the controllers sounded equally baffled. Rebecca brought the 737 down smoothly, touching down at 4:37 p.m. on a runway that looked exactly as she remembered it from years ago. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as it taxied to a remote gate. When Rebecca shut down the engines and opened the cabin door, she found herself facing airport security, local police and airline officials, all looking at the aircraft as if it were a ghost. "Who are you?" the airport manager asked. "Where did this aircraft come from?" "I'm Captain Rebecca Thorpe, Air Canada. This is Flight 437 from Vancouver to Toronto. We departed at 1:33 p.m. today and experienced electronic anomalies en route." "Today's date is October 12th, 2019, the manager said. "Air Canada has no record of Flight 437. Your aircraft registration shows that plane is currently in Vancouver undergoing maintenance for a landing gear issue. And frankly, Captain, you're not in our employee database." Rebecca produced her pilot's license, her employee ID, her passport. All showed dates consistent with 2024. Issuance dates, expiration dates, renewal stamps. "These are my credentials. I've been flying for Air Canada since 2010. I don't understand what's happening any more than you do." The passengers were deplaning now, equally confused. They had smartphones showing 2024 dates, photos and messages from 2024, apps and software that didn't exist in 2019. The flight attendants had identical documentation problems. Employee records that didn't exist, certifications from years in the future. Over the following hours, the impossible situation became undeniable. The aircraft was real and physical, matching the registration of a plane currently sitting in Vancouver maintenance. The passengers and crew were real people, many of whom existed in 2019 as younger versions of themselves. Rebecca Thorpe existed in 2019 as a slightly younger pilot flying different routes. "You're duplicates," a government official eventually explained, "or time travelers or something. The aircraft and everyone on it appear to have somehow arrived in 2019 from 2024. We've never encountered anything like this." "How is this possible?" Rebecca asked. "We don't know. We have physicists en route from universities trying to figure it out. But the evidence is undeniable. Your aircraft has technology that didn't exist in 2019. Software versions, hardware components, manufacturing dates stamped on parts. Your passengers have 5 years of memories that haven't happened yet. You're from the future." The implications crashed over Rebecca. She existed in 2 places simultaneously. here in 2019 as a time-displaced pilot, and also in 2019 as her younger self flying other routes. Everyone on the aircraft was doubled, existing both as their current selves and as their past selves. "What happens to us?" one of the passengers asked. "Do we just live through the next 5 years again?" "We don't know," the official admitted. "This is unprecedented. We're consulting ethicists, physicists, government ministers. In the meantime, everyone from Flight 437 will need to remain in quarantine while we figure this out." Days turned into weeks. The passengers and crew of Flight 437 remained in government custody, not as prisoners but as temporal anomalies requiring study and protection. Physicists examined the aircraft, finding evidence of passage through what they theorized was a chronoton field, a hypothetical pocket of distorted space-time that might explain the temporal displacement. "The best theory," one physicist explained, "is that your flight passed through a region where time had fractured. Like a crack in reality. You slipped through that crack from 2024 to 2019. The crack may have been caused by unusual solar activity or quantum fluctuations or something we don't understand yet." "Can we go back?" Rebecca asked. "Unknown. We're trying to locate where the temporal crack might be, but we're working with theories that were speculative even in..." The physicist paused awkwardly. "Even in your time." Rebecca was given a choice. Try to reintegrate into 2019 society under a new identity, or remain in protective custody. Most passengers chose reintegration, carefully documented and monitored by government programs. Rebecca chose to stay involved with the investigation, working with scientists to understand what had happened. She met her younger self once, carefully arranged by government officials. The 2019 Rebecca Thorpe sat across from her 2024 displaced counterpart, the two versions of the same person staring at each other. "This is impossible," 2019 Rebecca said. "I know," 2024 Rebecca replied. "I'm you from 5 years ahead. I've lived through the next 5 years and then somehow flew backward to now. What should I know? What happens? I can't tell you. The government officials made me promise not to share specific information, temporal contamination concerns. But I can say, you'll be okay. We'll be okay. Whatever happens, you become me and I'm still here, still flying, still alive." They talked for hours, comparing memories, confirming their identity. It was both surreal and obvious. They were clearly the same person, separated by 5 years of experience. As months passed, the investigation continued. The displaced passengers gradually integrated into 2019 society, living lives parallel to their past selves. Rebecca took a desk job with the Temporal Investigation Program, helping analyze the flight's data. Then on October 12, 2020, exactly 1 year after the displacement, something happened. Rebecca woke up feeling strange, dislocated. She looked in the mirror and saw herself fading, becoming translucent. By noon, she'd become completely transparent. By evening, she'd disappeared entirely. The same happened to all the Flight 437 passengers and crew. On the anniversary of their displacement, they simply faded from existence, as if erased from the timeline. The government scrambled to understand. The physicists developed a theory. The displaced people had been temporal duplicates, existing in a timeline that wasn't truly theirs. When the timeline caught up to when they'd arrived, the paradox resolved itself by erasing the duplicates. They hadn't died exactly, they'd simply ceased to exist. In 2019, their existence canceled by temporal mechanics. But the story didn't end there. On October 12, 2024, a Boeing 737 took off from Vancouver heading to Toronto. Captain Rebecca Thorpe was at the controls. Around 2:20 p.m., she noticed the clouds below had a strange golden tinge. The aircraft's GPS began showing the date as 2019. Radio contact with ATC failed. And Rebecca understood. She was about to experience the displacement for the first time, living through the event that she'd already lived through once before from the other side. Time was a loop and she was caught in it, about to arrive in 2019 where she'd exist for 1 year before fading back to where she belonged. The aircraft descended through golden clouds, and when it emerged, the date was October 12, 2019. Flight 437 had traveled through time again, completing a loop that had no beginning or end, just endless repetition of the same displacement. Rebecca landed in Thunder Bay, went through the same confusion, met her younger self again, and lived through the year knowing she'd disappear at the end. And when she faded on October 12, 2020, she found herself back in the cockpit on October 12, 2024, completing the takeoff, approaching the golden clouds. She was trapped in a temporal loop, eternally flying from 2024 to 2019, existing for 1 year before disappearing back to the moment before displacement. The flight that landed 5 years early hadn't ended. It kept landing over and over, Rebecca and her passengers cycling through the same year forever. Ghosts who arrived from a future they'd return to just in time to arrive from again. Story 4. The broadcast that came from nowhere. Dale Hoffman had been working as a radio engineer in Winnipeg for 26 years when he encountered the broadcast that changed everything. It was March 2022 during a routine maintenance shift at the CBC transmission facility outside the city. Dale's job involved monitoring the transmission equipment, ensuring signal quality, and troubleshooting technical issues. Routine, technical work that rarely surprised him. Around 2:30 a.m., Dale noticed something odd on the spectrum analyzer, a signal on a frequency that should have been empty. Canadian radio spectrum was tightly regulated. Every frequency was allocated and monitored. Empty frequencies stayed empty. But there it was. A strong, clear signal on 97.3 FM, a frequency currently unlicensed in the Winnipeg area. Dale tuned a receiver to the frequency and heard music playing. Old music, early, 1960s style, followed by a voice. "You're listening to CKWM Winnipeg's Voice to the World. It's 2:35 a.m., March 18, 1962. Dale checked the date, March 18, 2022. The broadcast claimed to be from exactly 60 years in the past. He assumed it was a prank or an unlicensed pirate station running a nostalgic format. Such things happened occasionally. Someone would set up illegal broadcasting equipment, and Dale would have to report it to regulatory authorities. He made note of the frequency and continued listening to gather evidence. But the broadcast continued in ways that seemed too elaborate for a simple prank. It ran commercials for businesses that hadn't existed in decades. News reports about events from 1962, weather forecasts for that date 60 years ago. The production quality was perfect, not modern recordings trying to sound old, but genuinely old recordings with the audio characteristics of 1962-era equipment. Dale tried to triangulate the signal's origin using directional antennas. The results made no sense. The signal seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, as if it were being broadcast from the air itself rather than from a specific transmission point. He called his supervisor at home, explaining the situation. The supervisor initially dismissed it as interference or atmospheric conditions, but agreed to come in when Dale insisted the signal was too strong and clear to be random noise. When the supervisor arrived around 3:15 a.m., the broadcast was still going. They listened together as CKWM played songs from 1962, ran advertisements for products long discontinued, gave news updates about John Glenn's recent orbital flight. Everything was temporally consistent with March 1962. "This is elaborate," the supervisor admitted. "Too elaborate for a typical pirate station. Let me make some calls." Over the next hour, they contacted other radio engineers across Manitoba. All confirmed receiving the same signal on 97.3 FM. a powerful broadcast covering at least 200 kilometers claiming to be CKWM from 1962. CKWM did exist, an older engineer confirmed after checking historical records. It was a Winnipeg station from 1947 to 1965. Broadcast on 1440 AM, not FM, and it definitely shut down 57 years ago. What you're receiving can't be the real CKWM, but it sounded real. Dale and his team spent the rest of the night monitoring the broadcast, recording it, analyzing it technically. The audio characteristics matched 1962-era equipment exactly. Tube amplifiers, vintage microphones, analog tape artifacts. Modern equipment, even trying to recreate that sound, would show subtle differences. This broadcast showed none. At 6:00 AM, CKWM played "O Canada," announced sign-off, and went silent. The frequency returned to empty static. Dale reviewed the recordings, finding no technical explanation. The broadcast had been real, powerful, and professionally produced, but its claimed origin, 1962, was impossible. Radio signals traveled at the speed of light. A broadcast from 1962 would have passed Earth 60 years ago, now 6 light years away into deep space. Unless the broadcast wasn't traveling through space, unless it was traveling through time. Dale reported the incident to the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission, expecting skepticism. Instead, he found that CRTC had been receiving similar reports for years. Phantom radio stations broadcasting from past decades, appearing briefly, then disappearing. CKWM was just the latest. "We call them temporal echoes," a CRTC investigator explained, "radio broadcasts that somehow persist in or return from the past." The theory is that under specific atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions, old radio signals can be reflected, stored. We don't really understand the mechanism, but a few times a year, somewhere in Canada, a radio station that's been off the air for decades will suddenly broadcast again, exactly as it did when it was operational. "Why isn't this common knowledge?" Dale asked. "Because it's impossible and we can't explain it. And announcing that phantom radio stations from the past occasionally broadcast would cause panic or ridicule. So we document it quietly and keep investigating." Dale became obsessed with the phenomenon. He set up equipment to monitor for temporal echoes, scanning frequencies during the atmospheric conditions that seemed to correlate with their appearance. Over the next months, he caught several. A French-language station from 1973 Montreal, broadcasting for 3 hours before disappearing. A weather report station from 1988 Calgary, running its automated forecast loop for 6 days straight. A CBC Northern Service broadcast from 1955 playing programming for indigenous communities in languages that now had few speakers. Each broadcast was temporally consistent, culturally authentic, technically genuine. They weren't hoaxes. They were real radio signals from the past, somehow reaching the present. Dale started corresponding with others who'd encountered temporal echoes. Engineers, amateur radio enthusiasts, academics. They formed an informal network, sharing observations and theories. Some believed the broadcasts were literally reflected signals, bounced back through time by phenomena science didn't yet understand. Others theorized they were parallel timelines bleeding through, versions of the past that still existed in adjacent dimensions. In October 2022, Dale detected the strongest temporal echo yet. CFRB Toronto broadcasting from November 22, 1963. The station was covering the Kennedy assassination. Reporters live on air describing the chaos in Dallas, the president's death, the nation's shock. Dale listened to history unfolding in real time, 60 years delayed, broadcast in the present from the past. But something was different about this broadcast. Between the news reports, Dale heard interference. Other voices speaking over the 1963 broadcast. modern voices speaking contemporary English, and they seemed to be aware of Dale. "Can you hear us?" one of the voices asked. "The people listening in 2022? We know you're there. We can hear you too. Time is thinner than you think." Dale grabbed his microphone, connected it to his transmitter, and broadcast back on the same frequency. "This is Dale Hoffman broadcasting from 2022. Who are you?" "We're engineers in 1963 receiving your signals from the future. We've been monitoring temporal echoes too, broadcasts from ahead of our time, your music, your news, your voices from decades we haven't lived yet. The radio spectrum is time-blind. Signals exist outside temporal sequence." Dale's hands shook. "How is this possible?" "We don't know, but we know it's real. We're communicating across 60 years right now. The gap isn't empty, it's full of broadcasts from all times, overlapping, interfacing. Radio exists in eternity." Over the next hours, Dale and the 1963 engineers exchanged information. They described their respective eras, their technologies, their worlds. The 1963 engineers marveled at descriptions of the internet, digital transmission, satellite broadcasting. Dale marveled at their live experience of events he knew only as history. "Can you warn us?" one of the 1963 engineers asked. "Tell us what's coming. Wars, disasters, things we should prepare for?" Dale hesitated. "I don't know if I should. Temporal contamination. Paradoxes. We're already contaminated. We're receiving broadcasts from your time. We know some of what's coming, but specifics would help. We could save lives." Dale made a decision. He spent the rest of the night broadcasting summaries of the next 60 years. Major events, technological developments, social changes. The 1963 engineers recorded everything, asking questions, clarifying details. At 6:47 a.m., the connection began to degrade. The 1963 broadcast started fading, interference increasing. The last words Dale heard from across the 60-year gap: "Thank you. We'll try to do better with what you've told us. Maybe history can change. Maybe we're not locked into the futures you describe." Then the signal was gone. 97.3 FM returning to empty static. Dale sat in stunned silence. He'd communicated with the past, given information that might alter history. And if history altered, would his present change? Would he remember a different version of the last 60 years? He checked news sources, history books, his own memories. Everything seemed unchanged. The Kennedy assassination still happened as he'd learned it. The intervening decades unfolded as he'd always known. Either the 1963 engineers hadn't been able to change anything, or changes they'd made were so subtle they'd been incorporated into the timeline Dale knew. Or, and this possibility disturbed him more, multiple timelines now existed in parallel. The original timeline continued unchanged for Dale, while a branching timeline diverged from 1963, incorporating the information he'd provided. Two versions of history, both equally real, separated by a single radio conversation. Dale never detected that specific temporal echo again. CFRB's November 22, 1963 broadcast didn't reappear, but other echoes continued, stations from various decades, some brief, some lasting hours or days. Dale monitored them all, recording them, cataloging them. And sometimes, rarely, he'd hear voices that seemed aware of him. Modern voices speaking through old broadcasts, or old voices responding to modern signals. Time was porous for radio waves, and conversations leaked through the gaps. Dale kept his recordings in a secure archive, documentation of the impossible. He tried publishing his findings in technical journals, but they were rejected as hoaxes or misinterpretations. The academic community wasn't ready to accept that radio signals could travel through time, but the broadcasts continued. And in March 2023, exactly 1 year after the first CKWM temporal echo, Dale detected it again. 97.3 FM playing 1962 music and news, claiming to be Winnipeg's voice to the world. But this time, between songs, Dale heard his own voice, recordings of his conversations with the 1963 engineers, played back as if they were part of CKWM's 1962 programming. His present had become someone's past. The broadcasts existed in a loop. Dale heard voices from 1962 communicated with voices from 1963. And now his 2022 broadcasts were being received by someone in an even later year, all of them speaking across time through radio waves that transcended temporal sequence. Dale understood then that he hadn't just encountered a phenomenon, he'd become part of it. His voice was now in the temporal echo network, broadcasting from 2022 to whenever, wherever the signals might be received. He was simultaneously the listener and the broadcast, receiving from the past and transmitting to the future, trapped in a cycle of voices speaking across years that collapsed into eternal present on the radio spectrum. The broadcast that came from nowhere had come from everywhere and everywhen, and Dale Hoffman had become one of its voices, speaking and being heard across gaps time couldn't close, because radio waves traveled faster than time's ability to separate them. Story 5. The forest where directions stopped working. Martin Rusk had been working as a forestry technician in northern Saskatchewan for 11 years when he entered the section of boreal forest that changed his understanding of geography. It was June 2020, during the height of pandemic isolation, and Martin was conducting a routine timber survey in a remote area 70 kilometers north of La Ronge. The assignment was straightforward: assess tree health and density in a 20 square kilometer section, collect GPS coordinates, mark sample plots for future monitoring. Martin had surveyed forests across Saskatchewan and knew the terrain well: black spruce, jack pine, muskeg wetlands, and countless lakes. Navigating boreal forest required attention to detail. Trees looked similar, landmarks were sparse, but Martin was experienced. He carried GPS, compass, maps, and satellite phone. Getting lost wasn't a serious concern. He entered the survey area at 8 a.m., marking his starting point with flagging tape. The forest looked normal: dense coniferous trees, thick moss underfoot, the perpetual damp smell of northern woodland. Martin began his systematic survey, working in a grid pattern, moving east for 1 kilometer, then south for 50 meters, then west for 1 kilometer, then south another 50 meters. The zigzag pattern would cover the entire area efficiently. Around 10:30 a.m., Martin noticed something odd. He'd been walking east for 20 minutes, which should have carried him at least 1 kilometer. But his GPS showed he'd only moved about 300 meters. He checked the device, thinking it was malfunctioning. The signal showed strong satellite lock, 7 satellites, excellent accuracy. But the distance didn't match his walking time. Martin marked his position and decided to walk a precise straight line for 10 minutes at his normal pace, then check his GPS distance. He chose a bearing and walked carefully, maintaining his direction. After 10 minutes, he checked. The GPS showed he'd traveled less than 100 meters. But Martin knew his walking speed. He should have covered at least 300 meters. He tried again, this time deliberately walking as fast as possible without running. 10 minutes of fast walking, the GPS showed only 70 meters of movement. The forest was compressing distance, or Martin was moving through space at a rate inconsistent with his physical effort. Either way, normal geographic relationships had broken down. Martin checked his compass. It showed north, consistently. He walked in the direction the compass indicated as north for 5 minutes, then checked his GPS track. According to the GPS, he'd walked southeast. The compass was lying, or the GPS was lying, or both were measuring different properties that no longer aligned. He tried a radio call on his forestry service frequency. "Base, this is Rusk. I'm experiencing navigation equipment malfunction. GPS and compass showing contradictory readings. Requesting advice. Over. Static. Martin tried his satellite phone. It showed signal, but calls wouldn't connect. Text messages wouldn't send. The device functioned mechanically but couldn't communicate with the outside world. Martin assessed his situation. He'd entered the forest from the south. Walking south should eventually return him to his vehicle, even if his navigation equipment was malfunctioning. He didn't need GPS or compass to follow one consistent direction. He chose a tree in the distance and walked toward it. Reached it. Chose another tree in what should be the same direction. Walked to it. Repeated this process dozens of times, maintaining as straight a line as possible. After what he estimated was 3 hours of walking, Martin should have exited the forest. The survey area was only 20 square kilometers. Walking in any consistent direction for 3 hours would carry him out, back to roads or lakes or clearings he'd recognize. But the forest continued unchanging. Same black spruce, same jack pine, same moss-covered ground. No landmarks, no variation, no edges. Martin stopped and thought carefully. If directions weren't working, then traditional navigation was impossible. But he could still perceive relative position. He could mark where he'd been and avoid walking in circles. He began leaving obvious markers, breaking branches, carving arrows into tree bark, piling rocks. Then he walked in what felt like a straight line for 30 minutes. When he looked back, he couldn't see his markers. The forest showed no signs of his passing. He walked back, or what should have been back, to his markers. They weren't there. The trees he'd marked weren't marked. Martin tried to find them for an hour, but the forest had erased all his evidence. Panic started gnawing at his composure. He forced himself to stay calm, to think logically. He had food and water for 3 days. He had survival gear. Getting lost wasn't immediately dangerous. Martin tried a different approach, moving in spirals. He'd spiral outward from a central point, gradually widening his search. Eventually, he'd intersect the forest edge or encounter something recognizable. He walked in spirals for hours. The forest remained identical and infinite. No edges, no landmarks, no changes, just endless boreal woodland that looked the same in all directions. Around 7:12 p.m., Martin heard something. Another person's voice. He ran toward the sound and found a clearing where a woman sat beside a small fire. She looked up as Martin approached, her expression showing resignation rather than surprise. "You're lost too," she said. "How long have you been here?" Martin asked. "I don't know. My phone says 3 days, but I've slept at least 7 or 8 times. Time doesn't match up." "I'm Emma Tsosi. I was doing wildlife research tracking caribou populations. Entered this section of forest 4 days ago, or 7 sleeps ago, and couldn't find my way out." Martin introduced himself and explained his experience. Emma nodded along, familiar with every detail. "It's the same for everyone who gets caught here. Directions stop working, distance gets compressed or expanded randomly. You can walk for hours and end up meters from where you started, or walk for minutes and somehow travel kilometers. The forest has its own geometry that doesn't match regular space." "Everyone?" Martin asked. "There are others. I've met 3. They're scattered through the forest, each trapped. We try to stay together, but moving toward each other doesn't always work. You can see someone in the distance and walk toward them for hours without getting closer. Space is broken here." Martin sat by Emma's fire, trying to absorb this. "How do we get out?" "I don't know. The others have been here longer. One claims 6 months, though his perception of time is probably distorted. They've tried everything. Walking in formations, staying still and waiting, following animal paths. Nothing consistently works." They talked through the evening, sharing their experiences. Emma showed Martin her GPS track log, a tangled scribble that looped back on itself impossibly, showing her walking through areas she'd already walked through, being in multiple locations simultaneously. The forest isn't normal space, Emma theorized. It's folded or curved in ways that break regular geometry. We're still in 3 dimensions, but those dimensions are arranged wrong. East can curve back to west. North can fold into south. You walk in a straight line, but the line itself is bent through higher dimensions you can't perceive. Martin asked about supplies. Emma had been rationing food, supplementing with berries and edible plants. Water was plentiful. Small streams ran through the forest, always accessible within short walks. Survival wasn't the immediate threat. The threat was psychological, being trapped in infinite, unchanging forest with no exit. That night, Martin slept fitfully, and when he woke, Emma was gone. Her campsite remained, fire pit, gear, evidence of her presence. But Emma herself had disappeared. Martin called for her, searched the surrounding area. No trace. He was alone again in the geometrically impossible forest. Days blurred together. Martin walked, rested, ate, survived. He encountered other trapped people occasionally. A hunter who'd been there for what he claimed was 2 years. A geology student who'd entered the forest the same week as Martin. A Parks Canada employee who couldn't remember how long she'd been trapped. Each meeting was brief. People would appear, talk for hours or days, then vanish when Martin wasn't looking. He began to understand the forest's properties through observation and conversation. Time moved inconsistently. His phone and watch showed contradictory durations. Sleep cycles didn't align with daily progression. Distance was non-Euclidean. Walking toward a visible landmark could increase the distance to it. Direction was relative rather than absolute. North wasn't a consistent direction but changed based on observer position. People could be in the same forest but unable to interact consistently. Proximity didn't guarantee meeting. Martin developed strategies to cope. He stopped trying to navigate and simply existed, moving when he wanted, staying when he didn't. He marked time by sleep cycles rather than days. He gathered food and maintained mental exercises to avoid losing himself in the unchanging environment. On what Martin counted as his 47th sleep, he found a structure, a fire tower, old and wooden, rising above the trees. He'd walked past this location dozens of times without seeing it, but now it was here, solid and real. Martin climbed the tower. From the top, he could see the forest extending infinitely in all directions. But he also saw something else, patterns in the canopy. The trees weren't randomly arranged. They formed geometric shapes, spirals, fractals, patterns that suggested intelligence or design. And in the distance, Martin saw a break in the trees. Not a clearing, but an absence, a place where the forest simply stopped, revealing something beyond. He descended the tower and walked toward the absence. The forest resisted, curving his path away from it. But Martin persisted, forcing himself to move in the direction of the absence even when his senses insisted he was moving tangentially. After hours of fighting the forest's geometry, Martin reached the edge and saw that beyond the edge was nothing. Not wilderness or civilization, but genuine nothing. A white void where space ended. The forest wasn't contained in Saskatchewan. It wasn't contained in Canada or Earth or any recognizable reality. It existed in its own pocket of space, adjacent to but separate from normal geography. Martin stood at the edge, staring into the void. He could step forward off the edge of the forest and fall into nothing. Or he could stay in the forest, trapped in impossible geometry, existing in a woodland that followed no rules. A voice spoke behind him. Emma returned from wherever she'd vanished. I found the edge months ago. Couldn't bring myself to step off. What if there's no return from the void? What if falling is permanent? But staying here is permanent too, Martin replied. Maybe. Or maybe the forest eventually releases people. Maybe we have to earn our way out. or wait for the right moment, or understand something fundamental. Martin stepped back from the edge, choosing to stay in the forest rather than risk the void. And in that moment of choosing, something shifted. The trees around him suddenly looked different, more normal, more aligned with regular geometry. His compass, when he checked it, pointed to a consistent north. His GPS showed a sensible location. "You accepted being here," Emma said. "The forest was waiting for you to stop fighting it. It traps people who resist but releases people who accept." Martin walked back into the forest, and this time his movement felt normal. Distance corresponded to effort. Direction stayed consistent. After 2 hours of walking, he reached the southern edge and saw his vehicle parked where he'd left it. He turned back to thank Emma. But the forest had returned to its infinite state behind him. She was still in there, still trapped, or still choosing not to leave. Martin couldn't tell which. He drove back to La Ronge and filed a report about equipment malfunction and early exit from the survey area. He didn't mention the impossible forest, the trapped people, the geometric anomalies. Who would believe it? But Martin never returned to that section. He marked it privately as an area to avoid, and when other forestry technicians were assigned surveys there, he warned them vaguely about navigation difficulties and equipment problems. Some came back quickly, reporting nothing unusual. Others didn't come back for days or weeks, returning with confused stories about getting lost and disoriented. And a few never came back at all, officially listed as missing in the boreal forest, though Martin suspected they'd found the edge where directions stopped working and geometry broke down. The forest where directions stopped working remained in northern Saskatchewan, accessible to anyone who happened to enter it from the wrong angle or at the wrong time. And within it, people wandered through impossible space, trapped until they accepted their trapping, navigating woodland that existed outside the rules that governed everywhere else. Story 6, The Highway Rest. Stop that aged you. Patricia Cole had been driving transport trucks across Ontario for 19 years when she stopped at the rest area on Highway 17 near Wawa. It was September 2021, late evening, and Patricia was hauling consumer goods from Thunder Bay to Sudbury. The route was familiar. She'd driven it hundreds of times, and the rest stop was one of her regular places to take mandatory breaks. The facility was standard. Parking lot, restrooms, vending machines, covered picnic tables. A few other vehicles were parked there when Patricia pulled in around 9:45 p.m. She locked her truck and walked toward the restroom building, noting the pleasant autumn weather and clear sky. Inside the restroom, Patricia washed her hands and looked in the mirror, and stopped, confused by what she saw. Her reflection showed an older woman, not dramatically older, but noticeably so. More gray hair, deeper lines around her eyes, a certain tiredness in her features that Patricia didn't see in herself. She touched her face, watching the reflection follow. It was definitely her mirror image, but aged perhaps 5 or 10 years. Patricia looked at her actual hands. They appeared normal, matching her age of 47, but the mirror showed hands that looked closer to 60. Patricia backed away from the mirror, deeply unsettled. This had to be a trick mirror, maybe slightly warped glass, creating a distorting effect. She moved to a different sink, a different mirror. Same result. Her reflection was older than she was. She hurried outside, breathing the cool air, trying to rationalize what she'd seen. The lighting in the restroom must have been strange, or she was more tired than she'd realized, perceiving her reflection incorrectly. Patricia walked to her truck to grab coffee from her thermos. As she opened the door, she glanced at her reflection in the truck's side mirror. Again, the image showed an older woman. Patricia grabbed her phone and switched it to selfie camera mode, taking a picture of herself. The photo showed her normal face, 47 years old, matching how she felt. But when she looked at any reflective surface, truck mirrors, windows, even puddles in the parking lot, the reflection was older. Patricia approached another trucker who was walking toward his vehicle. "Excuse me, this is going to sound strange, but can you tell me approximately how old you think I am?" The trucker looked at her, seeming confused by the question. "I don't know. 60? 65? Why?" Patricia felt ice spread through her chest. "You see me as 60-something? Give or take. Is something wrong?" Patricia didn't answer. She looked at the trucker carefully. He appeared to be maybe 50 years old. "How old do I look?" She held up her phone showing her selfie. The trucker squinted at the screen. "In the photo? 45, 50 maybe. But you look older in person. Honestly, lady, this is weird. I'm going to go." He hurried to his truck. Patricia stood in the parking lot, understanding what was happening. To other people, to mirrors, to any external observation, she appeared significantly older than she actually was. But to herself, to her phone camera, she remained 47. She looked at other people in the rest area. A family at a picnic table, parents and 2 children. But they all looked elderly, even the children. The children appeared to be at least 30 years old. The parents looked to be in their 80s. Patricia walked closer to the family. "Excuse me, how old are your children?" The mother looked up, her aged face showing confusion. "They're 7 and 9. Why? They look much older to me. Do I look normal to you?" The mother studied Patricia. "You look like a normal old woman. Are you feeling all right? Do you need help?" Patricia backed away. "No, I'm fine. Sorry to bother you." The rest stop was doing something to perception of age. Everyone Patricia observed appeared decades older than they should be, and to everyone else, Patricia appeared decades older than her actual age. But self-perception remained accurate. The mother thought her children were 7 and 9 because to herself they looked 7 and 9. Patricia thought she was 47 because to herself she looked 47. Patricia made a decision. Leave immediately. Get away from this rest stop and whatever was affecting it. She climbed into her truck, started the engine, and drove back onto Highway 17, heading east towards Sudbury. After 30 kilometers of driving, Patricia stopped at a gas station. She looked in the restroom mirror. Her reflection showed an even older woman, perhaps 70 years old now. She'd aged another 10 years and 30 kilometers of distance from the rest stop. The gas station attendant, when Patricia paid for fuel, looked at her with concern. "Ma'am, are you sure you should be driving? You look very tired. Do you need me to call someone?" "How old do you think I am?" Patricia asked. "I don't know, 75, 80? I'm just concerned because long-distance driving at your age." Patricia left without explaining. Back in her truck, she checked her phone selfies. She still looked 47 in photos, but every mirror, every reflection, every other person's perception showed someone decades older. And it was getting worse. Patricia pulled over at another rest area 50 kilometers farther and checked again. Her reflection now showed a woman in her 90s, bent and frail. She'd aged 50 years in the 2 hours since leaving the original rest stop. Patricia called her dispatcher, explaining she needed to end her route due to a medical emergency. The dispatcher's voice showed alarm. "Patricia, you sound different. Are you having a stroke? Your voice sounds much weaker." "Do I sound like an old woman?" Patricia asked. "You sound like yourself, but older? I don't know how to describe it. Please get medical help immediately." Patricia drove herself to the nearest hospital in Marathon. The emergency room staff reacted with shock when she walked in. "Ma'am, how did you drive yourself here? You need to sit down immediately." They rushed her to examination, treating her like a patient in her 90s. The doctor checked her vitals and looked baffled. "Your blood pressure, heart rate, All your physical indicators suggest you're middle-aged. But you look... I honestly don't know how to chart your appearance. It's inconsistent with your health metrics. I stopped at a rest area, Patricia explained, on Highway 17 near Wawa. After that, everyone started perceiving me as much older than I am. And it's getting worse. I'm aging to external observation even though I don't feel different. The doctor ordered tests, blood work, CT scan, neurological examination. Everything came back normal for a woman in her late 40s. But Patricia's appearance, to everyone who looked at her, continued aging. By midnight, hospital staff perceived her as being perhaps 100 years old. Nurses spoke to her in the elevated, simplified tones used for patients with dementia. "You're experiencing a perceptual anomaly," a consulting neurologist eventually concluded. "Everyone who observes you perceives advanced age, but your actual biological age remains consistent. This might be a mass hallucination or some kind of field effect you're emitting." "Is it going to kill me?" Patricia asked. "I don't think so. Your body is healthy. It's only the perception that's affected." But Patricia noticed something the doctors didn't. She was starting to feel older. Her joints ached more. Her breathing took more effort. The disconnect between her actual age and perceived age was beginning to collapse. Her body was conforming to how others saw her. By morning, Patricia felt genuinely elderly. She looked at her hands, the actual hands, not the reflection, and saw age spots, wrinkles, the physical signs of being 90+ years old. The phenomenon had moved beyond perception. It was now physically transforming her. "I need to go back," Patricia told the doctors, "to the rest stop. Maybe returning will reverse this." They advised against it, but couldn't legally prevent her from leaving. Patricia called a taxi. She could no longer safely drive, and had the driver take her back to the rest stop near Wawa, a 2-hour journey. The taxi driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, are you sure you're well enough for this trip?" "I have to try something," Patricia said, her voice now genuinely thin and aged. They reached the rest stop around 10 a.m. Patricia paid the driver and asked him to wait. She walked, slowly with the careful steps of genuine old age, into the rest area and toward the restroom building. Inside, she looked in the mirror. Her reflection showed a woman perhaps 95 years old. She looked at her actual hands. They matched the reflection now. The aging had become real. Patricia walked back outside and sat at a picnic table, thinking through what had happened. The rest stop had somehow initiated an aging process, not biological aging, but perceptual aging that gradually became physical. She'd aged approximately 50 years in 12 hours. Other vehicles were in the parking lot. Patricia watched a young man, maybe 25, walk toward the restroom. He emerged 5 minutes later looking confused and walked to his car mirrors to check his reflection. Patricia recognized the reaction. He was seeing himself aged. She approached him. "You see yourself older in the mirrors?" "Yes, how did you know? What's happening?" "This rest stop does something, changes how we're perceived. I stopped here last night and I've aged 50 years since then. You need to leave immediately and get as far away as possible." The young man looked terrified. "How do I stop it?" "I don't know. I came back thinking return might reverse it, but it hasn't. I'm still aging." They compared experiences. The young man's reflection showed him about 10 years older, mid-30s. His actual appearance hadn't changed yet. "Maybe it's cumulative," Patricia theorized. "The longer you stay away after leaving, the more the aging catches up to you. I drove hours away and let it progress. You just saw the initial effect. Leave now. Stay close to here geographically. Maybe it won't advance." The young man ran to his car and drove away. Patricia sat alone, feeling the weight of her suddenly elderly body. She looked at other people entering and leaving the rest stop. Most seemed unaffected. They came and went normally, no signs of aging. But a few showed the telltale confusion, the checking of mirrors, the disbelief at their reflections. The phenomenon was selective. It affected some people but not others. Patricia couldn't discern a pattern. She called the taxi driver back and asked to be taken to Wawa's small research station. She'd heard there was one associated with the University of Toronto. Perhaps someone there could help document and understand this. At the research station, a graduate student listened to Patricia's explanation with visible skepticism, until Patricia showed her sequence of selfies. The photos clearly showed Patricia looking 47. But to the graduate student's eyes, Patricia appeared to be over 100. "This is impossible," the student said. "But I'm seeing it. You're two different ages simultaneously." They spent the afternoon running tests and documenting Patricia's condition. By evening, Patricia could barely move. She felt genuinely ancient, her body failing in ways consistent with extreme old age. The graduate student called in a medical team. "She's experiencing what appears to be rapid aging syndrome," a doctor explained. "Her telomeres are shortening in real time. Her cellular structure is deteriorating. She's dying of old age despite having been middle-aged yesterday." Patricia was admitted to Thunder Bay Hospital, where physicians could only watch her decline. Her biological age advanced steadily. By that evening, medical tests suggested she was biologically 110 years old. By midnight, 120. At 2:47 a.m. on September 24th, Patricia Cole died of what was officially listed as extreme premature aging, cause unknown. She was 47 years old chronologically, but had aged nearly 80 years in less than 30 hours. After her death, researchers investigated the rest stop. They found elevated levels of localized radiation, not enough to be dangerous but unusual. Some theorized the rest stop sat on geological formations that emitted temporal radiation, particles that affected biological aging processes in susceptible individuals. Others thought it was curse or quantum anomaly. The rest stop remained open. Most people used it without effect. But warnings were quietly posted for truckers and travelers. If you notice unusual changes after stopping there, seek medical attention immediately and return to the location. Patricia's case was filed as an X-file in Canadian medical databases. A woman who aged decades and hours after stopping at a highway rest area, whose appearance diverged from reality until reality caught up catastrophically. The rest stop near Wawa remains there, on Highway 17, serving thousands of travelers yearly. Most experience nothing unusual, but occasionally someone will emerge from the restroom looking confused, staring at their reflection, seeing themselves aged beyond their years. And if they're unlucky like Patricia, the aging won't stop at perception. It will become physical, biological, fatal. The highway rest stop that aged you still operates, and the only warning is the one Patricia couldn't give. Don't stop there, don't look in the mirrors, don't let the place see you, because once it does, it starts counting your years in hours. Story 7, the mining town that existed in 2 times. Frank Sutherland had been working as a geological surveyor in northern Quebec for 28 years when he found the town that shouldn't exist. It was May 2023, and Frank was conducting mineral surveys for a mining company in the James Bay region, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest settlement. The area was supposed to be completely uninhabited, virgin wilderness with no human infrastructure. But on his survey's 3rd day, Frank's equipment detected metal signatures consistent with buildings. Not geological deposits, but refined metals and patterns suggesting human construction. His ground-penetrating radar showed structural foundations, roads, organized development. A town. Frank checked historical records on his satellite-linked computer. No settlements had ever existed in this location. No mining operations, no indigenous communities, no exploration camps. The area should be empty. But the instrument readings were clear and strong. Something was there. Frank decided to investigate physically, hiking 3 kilometers through boreal forest toward the center of the metal signatures, and emerged into a town. Not ruins or abandoned buildings, but an active settlement. Frank stood at the forest edge, staring at streets, houses, a main commercial area with shops and vehicles. People walked along sidewalks. Smoke rose from chimneys. The town was alive, functional, inhabited, but the architecture was wrong. The buildings looked like they were from the 1950s or early 1960s, mid-century modern style, old cars parked on streets, clothing styles that matched that era. The town existed in the present day, but looked like the past. Frank approached cautiously, walking down a street toward the town center. A sign identified the place as Nouveau Minière, Quebec, founded 1957. The population sign showed 847 residents. Frank tried to remember if he'd ever heard of Nouveau Minière. Nothing came to mind. People on the street noticed Frank and stared at his modern surveying equipment, his contemporary clothing. He must have looked as anachronistic to them as they looked to him. A man approached, middle-aged, wearing clothing from perhaps 1962. "Can I help you? You're not from here?" "I'm a surveyor," Frank explained. "I was working in the area and found your town. I didn't know there was a settlement out here." The man looked confused. "You didn't know about Nouveau Minière?" "We're a mining town. Been here since 1957. Where did you come from?" "Val d'Or, originally. I'm working for a geological survey company." "What mine operates here?" "The James Bay Copper Mine. Employs most of the town. You interested in work?" "We're always looking for experienced miners." Frank's mind raced. No James Bay Copper Mine existed in Quebec records. No Nouveau Minière appeared on any map. But here it was, solid and real, with hundreds of inhabitants living apparently normal lives in a town that officially didn't exist. "What's the date?" Frank asked. The man checked his watch. "May 15th. Why? What year?" The man's expression shifted to concern. 1962. Are you feeling all right?" Frank felt reality tilting. To this man, to this town, the year was 1962, but Frank's equipment, his phone, his knowledge all insisted the year was 2023. One of them was experiencing the wrong time. "Can you tell me what's happening in the world?" Frank asked. "Current events?" The man listed news from 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis looming, John Glenn's orbital flight, early escalation in Vietnam. Events that had happened 61 years ago from Frank's perspective, but were current news from the town's perspective. Frank thanked the man and walked through Nouveau Minière, observing carefully. Every detail confirmed a town existing in 1962. Newspapers dated 1962, radios playing music from that era, conversations referencing 1962 cultural touchstones. But the town also showed signs of existing in physical present. The buildings, while 1960s styled, weren't weathered or aged. They looked maintained, current within their temporal context. Frank found the town library and searched for history books. The most recent publication was dated 1961. No books from after 1962 existed. Frank asked the librarian when new books would arrive. "We get shipments quarterly from Montreal," the librarian explained. "Next one should be in June." Frank walked to the town limits. At the edge where town met forest, he found something remarkable. The boundary was visible. On one side, 1962, buildings, roads, parked cars from that era. On the other side, 2023, modern forest, 21st century trees grown to contemporary size. The two times existed adjacent, separated by a line maybe 20 meters wide where both times seemed to blur together. Frank crossed the boundary back into 2023 forest. He turned and looked at the town. From this side, it appeared ghostly, translucent, as if not fully real. But when he stepped back across the boundary into the town's space, everything solidified, became concrete and present. Nouveau-Minière existed in 1962 permanently. While the rest of the world had advanced 61 years, this town remained locked in that single year, its residents unaware that decades had passed outside their temporal bubble. Frank attempted to explain this to the town's mayor, a middle-aged man named Claude Bergeron. The mayor listened politely but clearly thought Frank was insane or playing a prank. "The year is 1962, Bergeron insisted. "I know this because I've lived every day from 1957 when we founded this town until now. I remember last week, last month, last year. Time moves normally here." "But outside your town," Frank said, "it's 2023. 61 years have passed." "That's impossible. How could 60 years pass out there while only 5 years pass here? Time doesn't work that way." Frank had no explanation. "Can I show you something?" He pulled out his smartphone, powering it on. The device's technology would be impossible in 1962. "This is from 2023. We call it a smartphone. It's a computer, phone, camera, and more in one device." Bergeron examined the phone, clearly fascinated and disturbed. "This isn't possible with 1962 technology. Because it's from 60 years in your future." They spent hours discussing the situation. Bergeron confirmed that from the town's perspective, time moved normally. Days passed sequentially from 1957 to now 1962. Residents aged normally, children were born, elderly died. But the town existed in a bubble where 1962 never ended. The calendar advanced day by day, but the year remained fixed. "What happens at the end of December?" Frank asked. "Does it roll over to 1963? "It should," Bergeron said. "But now that you mention it, I can't specifically remember any New Year's celebration going from 1962 to 1963. It's like my memory says we've been in 1962 for months, but I can't pinpoint when 1961 ended." Frank theorized that the town existed in a temporal loop. It experienced 1962 repeatedly. Not obviously, not in a way residents would notice, but subtly. Each December 31st rolled back to January 1st of the same year. Memories adjusted so residents wouldn't notice the loop. From inside the bubble, time seemed to progress normally. But from outside, the town was trapped in perpetual 1962. "Why?" Bergeron asked. "Why would this happen to us?" Frank investigated the mine, the James Bay copper mine that employed most of the town. He descended into the tunnels with the mine supervisor examining the operations. And deep in the mine, Frank found something, a geological formation unlike anything he'd encountered. Crystals, massive and geometrically perfect, growing in a chamber the miners had exposed. The crystals emitted unusual radiation and seemed to distort light and space around them. "These appeared about 5 years ago," the supervisor explained. "Right when we founded the town. We've been studying them, trying to understand their composition. They're not like any mineral we know." Frank's instruments went haywire near the crystals. His watch stopped. His GPS showed contradictory locations. The air felt thick, resistant, as if time itself had viscosity here. "These crystals are causing the temporal effect," Frank said. "They're generating a field that locks this area in 1962 as long as they're here emitting this field. The town can't progress beyond that year. Can we remove them? Break the effect? I don't know. They might be keeping the town stable. Removing them might cause the town to experience all 61 skipped years at once. Everyone would age 6 decades instantly. Buildings would decay. The town might collapse into ruin." Bergeron and the mine supervisor looked at the crystals with new horror. They were trapped, not by physical barriers but by temporal ones that protected and imprisoned them simultaneously. Frank stayed in Nouveau-Minière for what the town experienced as 3 days. During that time, only 3 hours passed in the outside world. Time flowed at different rates inside and outside the bubble. When Frank left, crossing back into 2023 forest, he looked back at the town wavering between visibility and translucence. He marked the location carefully in his GPS and returned to Val d'Or to file his report. His company didn't believe him. The coordinates he provided when checked by satellite showed only uninhabited forest. Frank's instruments had detected metal signatures, but follow-up surveys found nothing. The town existed only for those who entered its temporal field directly. Frank returned multiple times over the following months. Each visit, the town insisted it was 1962, always 1962, never advancing, never acknowledging the loop. Residents didn't remember Frank's previous visits. Each time he had to re-explain the temporal situation to Mayor Bergeron, who'd forgotten their previous conversations when the year looped back. Frank documented everything: photographs, videos, interviews with residents. But when he left the temporal field, his digital files would corrupt. Only physical notes survived, handwritten descriptions that couldn't be independently verified. The mining town that existed in 2 times became Frank's obsession. He spent years visiting, studying the crystals, trying to understand the mechanism. He proposed ways to break the loop, removing the crystals, suppressing their radiation, evacuating the town before destabilizing the field. But he never acted on these proposals, because the residents of Nouveau-Minière, while trapped, were also protected. Outside the bubble, decades passed, but inside, no one aged beyond 1962. They existed in a preserved moment, unaware of their imprisonment. Frank grew older, 56, then 63, then 70. Each time he visited Nouveau-Minière, the residents were unchanged. The man who'd first greeted him remained middle-aged in 1962. Children remained children. The town was a snapshot, eternal and unchanging. In 2031, when Frank was 75 years old, he made a final decision. He entered Nouveau-Minière, crossed the temporal boundary one last time, and stayed. He took up residence in the town, accepting a job at the mine, integrating into the community. For Frank, it was 2031 and he was elderly. But for Nouveau-Minière, it was 1962 and Frank was whatever age he appeared to be to them. The temporal field adjusted his perception and others' perception of him. Within days, Frank felt younger, his arthritis fading, his energy returning. The town's eternal 1962 was reversing his age, locking him into its preserved moment. Frank spent his remaining years, or perhaps his eternal years, in Nouveau-Minière, Quebec. A town that existed in 2 times, physically present in 2023 and beyond, temporally locked in 1962, inhabited by people who would never age, never leave, never know that the world outside had moved on for decades while they remained suspended in a single year, protected by crystals deep in a mine that bent time into loops from which there was no escape, only endless repetition of the same year, the same days, the same moments forever and ever, 1962 without end.